While you're enjoying your lunch, I am delighted to be able to introduce to you our friend and former keynoter for COFES for 2008, I believe, 2009, Chuck House. And I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder. I want you to pay very, very close attention in Chuck's presentation to a particular point that he raises. And that is, if you look at the bigger picture, regardless of what we do here in the developed world, even if we cut our consumption and use to zero, there's a much, much, much bigger problem out there. And until we start addressing the problems of the rest of the world and their future needs, we're all sunk. Chuck? Right before Chuck gave his keynote at COFES in 2009, he was working on his book, The HP Phenomenon, and it was not ready for us in time for us to be able to give it out. But it has been published now, and I strongly suggest you take a look at it, and I hope Chuck will say a few words about it.
Sure. Happy to. Now, how does this all work? I just stand here and it works good? Can you hear me? Okay, so this book is cool. On a price per pound basis, it's probably the best bargain out there. 656 pages for $23 and a dime. It's not quite as good as Joel Orr does with all those free Lulu Press things, but you know, it's got that idea. But I wasn't going to talk about the book particularly, other than to say it's fantastic. It really traces the history. I'm an HP guy. A long-standing HP guy, and I was delighted on the back of our conference to see that Intel and HP have now merged. I don't know if you saw that, but those two logos appear in one space. All the other companies get single billing, but that's a real credit. Looks like Intel bought HP, though, the way it reads. Is that what happened? You know what I'm talking about.
So I actually can't respond to that, but I can tell you that our representatives from HP and Intel are not in this room. They're across the street having lunch together.
Oh, yeah, well, okay, there you go. That's right, and John Gage is in the room, and he always fought actively against us, and so I had to come hear what he's going to say, tomorrow. So we're going to have some good, clean fun. The key thing about HP, the HP written about in the book, is that it's Agilent today, not HP. And their belief was that Lord Kelvin had it right. And what that was he said, unless you can measure it, you can't say anything meaningful about it. And I think that's been the theme all morning, is that we really can build these buildings, but unless we can measure what their impact is and know what the points are, and I think Amanda made that point more strongly than I will, but that is crucial to anything we do, wherever we do it, is that we are able to tell what we're trying to do. So I'm going to build the talk somewhat around that, and I'll tell you and I've also heard a lot of this innovation and creativity and how do you stimulate things from people, and I'm reminded of Phil Kinney and in his comments at HP today. He said he's the CTO at HP in charge of innovation, right? And he says something like, what happens in our school system is all these kids hit school at kindergarten and they're all creative and innovative and they think in systems terms and they aren't pigeonholed into any one specific place. And it takes us 3 or 4 years of schooling to knock that out of them. And he says, and a few are recalcitrant and they wind up becoming engineers. Okay, or architects or what, they become designers, if you will. And he says, and then we hire them at HP, and he says, it takes us 3 or 4 more years to beat it out of them. And I think there's kind of a message here, and to a degree I heard from Ken's comments about Gensler that it's just impressively hard for people our age, and I'll say it kind of that way. You may not want to be lumped quite in that age group, but to rethink how we've always had underlying assumptions drive our decisions. And so that's really what I want to talk to. So let's see what happens here. Oh, and I'm supposed to give Stanford won't let me come unless I give an advertisement. So this is, I run the Media X program at Stanford. It's an industry connection to faculty. The idea is that member companies can bring visiting researchers. We can sponsor workshops and seminars together. And we can sponsor research initiatives with faculty, provided that the faculty get intrigued by your problem as opposed to, it's a paid for a focus group kind of thing. So if you want to know more about it, I'd be happy to talk about it. And I'm supposed to tell you this is really important. So I've just done that. But notice where we are. We're in the front building on the main quad, 40 feet from the president. So, that says how important we are to Stanford. That's the only measure I can find that says we're important, but that's all right. We have an unusual charter. There's 62 institutes at Stanford, almost all of them single department focused. We happen to be one of 4 that's allowed to go campus-wide. Here's an example of the departments we work with: law school, business school, engineering, computer science, medicine. We can put together interdisciplinary, multifunctional kinds of teams, providing it's information technology that we're talking about. So we can't do work in climate control, but we can do work in how do you talk about climate control. It's a license to steal. It's a lot of fun. And we'll be happy to talk with any of you during the conference about these kinds of things. So that's the crass commercials out of the way. Here's our globe. You've probably, not many of you in the room have seen it from that vantage point personally, right? Any of you? I've talked with a number of people who have, and they tell me that's actually real. But most of you have seen that. And I'm going to suggest that most of us in this room, to some degree, have worked on things that contribute to the left side. Maybe not altogether, but certainly some. And a lot of the issues around that kind of construction is what we're here talking about today. Here's one of any of 10,000 communities. We now, with Google Earth or similar technology, we can get a snapshot at any given time of any urban area in the world, right? And it turns out in terms of design architecture, Mother Nature is pretty good too. This is after the tsunami hit. And somebody was commenting this morning, I think Terry, about Paul Hawkins said in 100 years we have to tear down the cities. They did it in a day, so we can start over. Now, this is a little more catastrophic perhaps than everybody wants to have happen to their community, but it is a chance to rebuild. So designing for sustainability, I got to think, what does that mean? Should we be designing for 9/0 earthquakes or 60-foot high tsunamis? Or, what? And it was interesting. I went out and interviewed a series of architects. My son is an architect, so I had a chance to do that sort of, his 3 friends kind of deal. This is a very scientific study. And they said, we design for between 7.0 and 7.5. We don't design for 8.0. And I'm thinking, well, how many 9/0 earthquakes have we had in the last 30 years compared to the last 200 years that we know of? And the answer is almost all of them, stemming from the 64 in Alaska, almost all of the big earthquakes have happened in the last decade. Is there a message here? Is something changing about our environment, and should that be cranked into our thinking? I'll come back to that. I'm going to give an actual outline to this talk. I've been doing this kind of a context setting so that you'll quit talking to your neighbor and focus on me. This is the meat of the talk. I want to talk about how do you think about paradigm shifts, and how do you think about the quantitative skills that we might try to enhance so that all of us have a better basis for dealing with these problems. And then I have just a few examples and some perspective on some educational attempts to kind of seed that next generation. Fair? So that's it. We versus they. So here's kind of those Japanese things dimmed out, right? I happened to be in Hachioji, Japan, which is 30 miles west of Tokyo, and I had just finished saying to a group, we're going to talk about earth-shaking products. I'm going to take you through the last 15 years of Apple. And we had worked out at noon some hand signals for I wasn't loud enough or I was speaking too fast or something. And all of a sudden they're doing a bunch of hand signals we had not rehearsed. And the gist of it was that we were having an earthquake. This is March 11th at 2:47 p.m. Japanese time. And at dinner, my host said, "Chuck-san, let's not talk anymore about earth-shaking products." We were in a building that I didn't know how tall it was, but I knew it was taller than our floor. We were on the first floor in a room that was probably half again as big as this, both width and length. So I estimate it was 80 feet wide, 120 feet deep, no central pillars. And where do you go when you're in? How many of you have ever been through an earthquake? What's the rule? Under the desk, in a doorway. Anything else? Outside, not a bad idea. Yeah. So it turns out the most recent studies say the triangle of life is what you want to do. Anybody who in the Oakland collapse of the freeway system for the Loma Prieta earthquake in '89, 3 minutes into the World Series game, you might remember. The key events was the World Series. Anybody who got out of their car survived. Everybody who stayed in their car died. There might be a message here. And so the message is the triangle of life is get next to something big. If you're in your bedroom, roll out, get next to the bed. Don't get under the bed, get next to the bed. If you're in the car, get out of the car, lay next to the car. If you're in the kitchen, lay down next to the center island. Because when the roof comes down, it'll have this little pocket that it doesn't quite fold into. This is a study done out of 800 earthquake studies of where people live and where people die. Well, I'm trying to explain to my Japanese hosts I'm looking for this triangle of life. Incidentally, the Red Cross doesn't buy this theory at all. They still teach under the desk. These guys had taken Red Cross training, and they're having me get under a desk, and it's these portable desks, and the damn thing, are you going to start that machine? So my talk just starts now? Great. Okay.
You got an extra 15 minutes?
That worked out great. The desk. Yeah. So he wants me under the desk. Well, these are these portable tables, and I had sat on one to kind of work on my computer, and it collapsed earlier in the day. So I'm thinking, that doesn't feel like the right place to be. I ran for the doorway, and two vice presidents of this, grabbed me and, "No, Chuck-san, you get under the desk with us." Pretty soon, their eyes are the size of dinner plates. It was great. We're eyeball to eyeball, butts in the air, and this thing shook for like 5 minutes, fairly lengthy. And I've been through a lot of quakes, and this was the only time I ever thought, this probably is it. Turned out, we're fine. So it ends. I am like the 8th person out of 2,000 to the outside. Why wait around? Would have been helpful to grab my coat. It was 38 degrees out there. We were outside for 3 hours before we were allowed back in. A little awkward. And here's what happened. The phones quit immediately. The radio, TV quit immediately. Traffic got commandeered immediately. The Japanese are terrific about moving on crisis. The railroads stopped for 18 hours. 60% of Japanese go to work by train. How are you going to get home? Friday afternoon, 2:47 p.m. Well, let's stop the trains till tomorrow morning. Good idea. Airports stopped, except there's still planes in the air, right? All of a sudden, we have a plane about 1,000 feet overhead, landing gear down, flaps up, and somebody says, "There's no airport around here." Well, it turned out there was a little private airport, and Hachioji was cleared for this military base, compared to Narita and Haneda, which had been closed for runway damage. So it was an entertaining few minutes. The key thing is nobody could figure out, is this story interesting to you? Yeah. It has nothing to do with sustainability, but it's a great story. I sent a message to my wife. You know how these things work? You have right? And I sent a text message. It opened with "holy shit." You know, it's a fairly cryptic phrase that said, "I've just been in, the biggest earthquake I've ever been in." And she remembered Loma Prieta with no problem at all. And she sends back a message that says, "There's nothing reported over here." 30 seconds later, she sends one that says, "USGS just says 7.1, which is big. Loma Prieta was 6.8. 30 seconds after that, I get another one that says, "Oops, 8.8. They've just upgraded it." My host says, "Ask her where." So we're sending messages 5,000 miles back and forth to find out where we're standing, what's happening. Huh? There's something weird about this, right? All of a sudden, all these Japanese are clustered around me. What's she say? Where is it? Where's the epicenter? She sends back Honshu. And he says, "Could you be more specific?" And she sends back, "Honshu Island." Not quite it. Then it turns out we're 200 miles from the epicenter, and she relaxed. "Oh, well, thank God you're safe." Huh? So the difference between a 9.0 and a 6.8, let's just get a show of hands. How much is that? A lot, huh? 170 times the energy. Huh? Pretty good. Probably you could feel it 200 miles away. Then you ask, how far were you from Loma Prieta Center when it hit? And the answer, if you were in Oakland, was 70 miles. The freeway didn't worry about how far it was. It just fell down, huh? Or the bridge. So distance isn't necessarily the calibrator. So anyway, then, of course, the Japanese are worried about tsunami, and that wasn't on the USGS report. And then we got worried, of course, about the nuclear stuff. And I had a call. The phones were working by the next day. I got a call from the guy that ran the National Fusion Program out of Washington, D.C. He said, "Chuck, if I were you, I'd catch the first plane out," which I did. And there were some interesting things while I was there. You don't have anything to do. There's not a lot of food in different places. But it's all kind of a spirit of whatever. And so I went out walking. And I stepped off the curb and looked the direction I always look, and it turns out the traffic's on the other side. Been to London? It's that kind of thing. And I stepped out in front of a moving bus about 8 feet away. And he was an alert bus driver, or I wouldn't be here. And my daughter said later, she said, "That'd be a great," she's a writer. She said, "God, it'd be great material. World famous scientist, escapes earthquake flattened by bus." Pierre Curie got killed by a streetcar exactly that way. And the other one I loved was CNN. For 2 days, 48 straight hours, it was broadcasting how terrible this was. There are 10% of Japan is without power, and millions of people are homeless. In fact, 364 million homes are without power. Huh? And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, they do better on vacation homes than we do by quite a bit. 110 million Japanese, right? 10% of them without power, that's 11 million. 364 million homes for 11 million Japanese. This is 30 homes per person. Man, woman, and child. I mean, holy smokes. So the evidence there to me is, and then radiation. We had the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm sorry to belabor this little example, but it's pretty good. San Francisco Chronicle a week ago, front page, Berkeley, which is the bastion of all smart stuff in the Bay, has done radiation studies, and they found in San Luis Obispo that the spinach crop has been irradiated, and up in Nevada, the strawberry crop. And it's just terrible. And they give in microcuries how much it is, and it's just, and it's way over anything that's ever been experienced. And I'm reading this thing, and it had a couple of other stats. And it turns out if you eat 2 pounds of spinach a day from San Luis Obispo at those levels, for 2 years, you match the radiation I got on the plane ride home from Tokyo to San Francisco. So, So my conclusion here is scientific knowledge. As I ask these questions, why did my phone work and theirs didn't, of people back home? They don't know. They don't know about packet switching versus voice networks. They don't know about powers of 10 on magnitude earthquakes. We know, but most people don't. Even people who should don't. So we make so many assumptions in our lives that drive against things that are actually scientifically based, but we kind of take them for granted. So I just wanted to put that out there. And now I've completely screwed up my time, but thank God I got those extra minutes. Oh, no. Okay, so for disruptive events, what happens is we start just after the event asking, oh, shit, what do we got to do? What we don't often do is ask how much or what are we, what's the real response and what's the opportunity here as well as the cost. So I just wanted to put that in front of you. And then I borrowed a slide from Ken. Basically, everything I've heard around the earthquake is still up in that visible part of the glacier. And what I want to take you through is some of these other pieces during the rest of this talk. Fair enough? So I think our topic today has been pretty explicit. And it's really an amazing group that Brad has put together here. So I want to endorse that. And I want to note that we're really trying to think out of the box. And I think the Green Alliance, or whatever you call that thing, is in that vein. Green Keystone Alliance, right? That's not bad. That's a ski resort in Colorado, so it's easy to remember. And I've got to do it in a way that I don't seem irrelevant. So, I've got to work on that. And here's our action plans. So that came out of here. And right after I'm done, we're going to talk about cross-sector scalability. So, we're working the right issues in this room. But I've heard a lot of naysayers today about, this is pretty tough stuff. And then I looked at this slide from Ken, and I thought, tough stuff? We're going to get to 100% reduction by 2030? You got to be shitting me. Huh? There is no way.
That's right. No way.
So, and this is only for the U.S. And Brad was saying, what about those 2 or 3 billion people in Asia and the subcontinent of India? So I thought I'd show a picture of some of them. There's a lot of stuff left once we get the buildings taken care of here. Huh? And Brad also said, I don't want this to be a doom and gloom talk. So I said, okay, we'll call this that scenario. We won't talk about his real problems. But if we get good at this, we got plenty of challenge, is the point of that slide. And I'm indebted to Neil Jacobstein, who's the CEO of the new Singularity University that comes out of Ray Kurzweil's work. And he says, let's kind of put going from me and mine to us and ours to them and theirs on the one axis, and let's put time frames on the other, and we'll make that a semi-log plot. None of you have to have that interpreted, I trust. And there's what we usually worry about, up to about 5 years for us. And here's the problems we're talking about. And here's the reward system that we all get paid by. Huh? So there's some dissonance in this system, is the idea. And then he says the real problem is this. We're dealing with a fairly ancient 3-pound organism called a brain that is pretty obsolete in how it goes about damn near everything that pertains to today. And so I think about the planned obsolescence ideas that you were outlining. And I got to thinking about just assumptions. So here's one of them. So my wife's father and my father were both traveling salespeople. They both traveled 100,000 miles a year by car, and they both traded a car every year because they wore the car out. They didn't have a Volvo that did 2.8 million miles, and so here we were. The message she took away was, and we met in midlife, so we didn't, really get our dads together to compare it. She took away the message, you get a car every year. I took away that you drive a car 100,000 miles. Those are fairly different value propositions. And it turns out they have energized some of our discussion over time. Well, we're faced with a superset of that. Today we have competition from everywhere, and we have, data. I think you mentioned we've got way too much information and we just don't use it, ergo. And technology amplifies our power to either do good or to screw things up, pretty exponentially. So it's kind of an interesting paradox that all we've got is us. We had a guy at HP, he said, well, we got rid of Hewlett and Packard. They retired. He said, what do we do now that the two demigods are gone? And the answer was, well, us 20 pygmies have to figure it out. We have no one but us. So I'm going to submit some thoughts. A paradigm is kind of the way of life or point of view that we bring to things. And it's really a filtered lens. And I think that our last speaker came at that question, or maybe it was Keith that came at it. Let's see, I have to figure out who came at it. Somebody came at it anyway. And the notion was, we're trapped in our reality system, and it's awfully hard to step outside that. If you have a paradigm shift, somehow you get moved out of your assumption base and you get into some new space. Fair? And there was a great book written on this years ago by Thomas Kuhn. It's absolutely an unreadable book, but the title is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It was mind-bending, and then a guy named Joel Barker did the layman's version, and so it was intelligible. But I'd commend either of those books to you. What I want to focus on, though, is structural change, because structural change actually changes the facts. This is the question of whether you can do nanotechnology or whether you can do supersonic transports. Things are different once you invent something different, structurally different. You can have a different way of coming at it. And I think a lot of what's running through this green movement is people working on structural change, coming up against people who are locked in old paradigms. And so we can see the promise if you could get that paradigm shift in thinking, but it's a long way from happening just because we did the technology. So I think the notion about I can build great software, but who's going to use it, no company will adopt it, fit that kind of thing. Now, the interesting thing to me is paradigm shifts tend to be cultural, and structural shifts tend to be technology. So the question, I think, for DaS is, how do we lead in both sides? And my hunch is that in general, we are better at the second than at the first. But it won't have impact unless we're good at both of those in kind of a simultaneous order. And I'm going to argue that math and science thinking and visualization can help, providing they're done the right way. Think about airline pilots. If we asked you, in order to fly a plane, that you had to pass convolution integral calculus to write the equations for landing, we wouldn't have as many pilots, right? But what we do is we pop them in a flight simulator, and we kind of give them the feel of sitting in the cockpit and doing a little joystick riding. And if you've ever ridden a bicycle, it's pretty easy to move on to a flight simulator. And so we give you a contextual feel that's modeled, simulated, if you will, around the science of landing that plane. It's doing the calculus for you. Fair? So I want to argue on that kind of thing. And one of the things MediaX gets to do, we've probably worked with 100 companies in the last decade, and most of them will share with us some of their forward view, and some will even let us share with you their forward view. So HP allowed me 2 slides. I didn't steal these. I want that clear. Of what they see as the future. And the notion is, in a world of 1 trillion sensors, and you could make it 100 trillion or a quadrillion now that Intel's buying them. My God. Lots of new devices. We might even have readers that are better than the iPad. It wouldn't be hard. And better than Kindle. And here's kind of an interesting one. They model that. Take any data center today. We just heard a question about, energy profiles of data centers. Take any data center today, and odds are 20,000 times that amount of power will be in your hands in 20 years. Changes everything. And then we're going to add photonics and other technologies, and it'll be pretty exciting, right? Now, that sounds nuts to me. But then I think, how many of you have an iPod? Somebody mentioned iPods earlier. It's a little music thing. Yeah, you've seen these? Your kids have them probably. The current one holds, 40,000 songs? And it's about 1/3 this size, $100. 40,000 songs. So the Computer History Museum just opened their new timeline. They brought the RAMAC, which is the first disk drive built by IBM in Santa Teresa Labs. 1956. This thing is a little bigger than this podium. It's 30 inches on a side, 3 feet high, had 50 platters in it, and the guy who invented it is standing there telling you about it. Huh? Still alive. He's 117 years old, but he's, you know. There he is, and he's telling this little crowd, and my wife is a Berkeley computer science grad, so she's not exactly illiterate on this topic, although we could debate that. Is this being recorded? Oh, no. She's really terrific. And fourth generation Berkeley girl, you know, 4 degrees from Berkeley, piece of cake. And she says, my God, how many songs did it hold? 1. 50 platters, the size of a wash tub, 1 song. Today, 40,000 on an iPod stick. Huh? So it's not out of the question we'll have that kind of power. If we do, what do? Well, one thing we can do, we're going to print images everywhere, free. This is not the HP printer group. This is the world will have ability to put images anywhere for virtually nothing on all surfaces. Big building walls, you've seen some of these things. Huh? If that's true, we can show the world it's science without you having to write calculus equations, can't we? We can show you what your building profiles are. We've got a program at Martin Fisher is here. He's with SciFi, which stands for, I have to read it, Center for Integrated Facilities Engineering. I go over there all the time. And what they worry about is how do you, among other things, how do you persuade people to take advantage of the building environments they're in, which is different than how do you build the right building. It's integrating that whole thing. If you can show the images of the power utilization or the energy consumption or the whatever, you have a chance. So we're going to have that kind of future. I want to talk a little bit, I don't know why I've got this slide, but that's a snake about to eat that frog, and it's an awkward situation for the frog. But I wanted to use this to demonstrate, doubling every year, exponential growth, 1, 2, 4, 8, those sequences. These are the quantitative skills. I want you to become good at logarithmic or semi-logarithmic plots. Moore's law. This is why they want to change. What you were talking about, planned obsolescence. And I got to thinking about Cornell. Did I tell the Cornell story yet? Okay, so I'm on the Cornell board in 1988. This is the Electrical Engineering Computer Science, advisory board, I guess you'd say. And they said, oh, an HP guy, that's great. We want a bunch of gear given to us. That's how universities operate. And I said, well, let's go see your lab. And then we go into the EE lab, and they've got the 130C scope built in 1962. They've got voltmeters built in 1956. This is 1988, right? And I thought they want new scopes and new voltmeters. No, those work just fine. What we want are new workstations. They said, yeah, let us show you our computer lab. We started with the IBM 1401, then we got PDP-H from DEC, and then we got VAX 780s from DEC, and then we got IBM PCs from IBM, and then the Macs came in, and we got a Mac lab, and you and this little upstart called Sun are building the classy workstations, and theirs works and yours doesn't, but if you could make yours work, it'd really be cool. We'd like a free gift of, So here telescoped in a 30-year period, they love the tools that we built for real engineers, and all this crap called computing has gone through 7 generations. Huh? And it's because of this. Because you go 10 to the 5th in a few years. Now, disk drives went actually faster. We don't tell this story because Gordon Moore didn't invent it. But the idea is if you had the same disk drive capability at the same rate, your iPod would be, 14 pounds and you wouldn't have as much fun with it. So the question is, do you understand logarithmic or exponential math? And the powers of 10 that Chuck and Ray Eames did. This is pretty good. So let's just here's a guy laying on a blanket in Liberty Park in Chicago, and here's, 100 feet up, little small helicopter. Here's 1,000 feet up. Huh? Here's a little higher, that's 5 miles up. Huh? And here's a little further out, there's the lake. And here's a little further out. That's how far, that's 10 to the 8th. That's how much transistors in integrated circuits have changed in my design lifetime, not in my lifetime. Huh? We don't think of those scalings that way. Large corporations, this is great. Most large corporations grow fast and then level off. Here's the percentage growth rates for 4 of our larger well-known companies, right? Cisco's now in retrenchment mode, and Intel's buying HP, so they'll do better, and so forth. But the key thing is I'm teaching semi-log plots at a university, and 2 people out of 100 knew what they were. So it was an MBA program, I should qualify it. And both of them were undergraduates in biology. Figures, okay. And the instructor hands me, this is across from the Redmond campus, hands me the Excel instructor's guide, which is 1,090 pages. Huh? Big, makes this book seem small. Big book. And in the index on page 617 it says semi-log plots. Or logarithmic plots or something to that effect, right? Turn there, and in the second paragraph, the lead sentence says, these plots are really important for business. No graph, no tab, nothing. That's it. 1,090 pages. We have one sentence about the most useful single piece of mathematics you can do in business. So I thought that was pretty good. I've done an unscientific sample, kind of like with my architect son, at 10 MBA schools in the last year, and I have found 7 people who know about semi-logarithmic plots. And there's the 8th just checking in. My God. Amazing. You can't get away with anything. Then visualization. How many of you have looked at sort of these social media maps and things like that? For the first time, we're going to have an ability to take social scientists and quantify what people do. It's astonishing. The social sciences, I have to tell you, are so excited, and they're going to drown. You think we're drowning in statistics now, just wait. When the political scientists get a hold of this stuff, it's going to be awful. But no, it's going to be terrific. I almost got the wrong word out of my vocabulary there. The point I want to make is we started a program with National Science Foundation in 2003 to do a 10-year study of having people do the best maps we could do in America. And the idea was they'd pick a theme each year. Best maps for science, best maps for education, best maps for energy consumption, all these kinds of things. Have a contest, pick the best 10, ballyhoo them, and put them out there. And in 2009, so it's been running 6 years, the exhibit, and there is an exhibit, had never been west of the Mississippi. Huh? And I learned about it then. Somebody actually came into SciFi to lecture, and she was great. Katty Borner is the originator of this at Indiana University. And I said, what would it take to get the exhibit? She said, if you can pay the train fare or airfare to ship the cardboard, it's yours. We got it for 7 months, and we showed it. We had it on a public display. It was phenomenal. But what impressed me was it had never been seen on the West Coast anywhere. Why not? These are tools that we should all be using all the time. I'll give you one more, and this goes back to an example years ago. CAPPC stands for Colorado Air Pollution Control Commission, which I got nominated to in 1970. I'd just been told I had emphysema. I thought that doesn't sound like a good idea. Let's go work on an environmental question. I was younger by 20 years than anyone else on the commission, and I had no qualifications other than passion. But leaving that aside, I'm on it. I get there, and they told me that the American Medical Association has decided that this is an urban disease. Cigarettes matter, but it's really an urban disease. And the reason, therefore, and Colorado has been given special dispensation, Colorado and California, to pass unique laws independent of the feds. And the reason was Colorado has the highest altitude state. The second reason was our chairman happened to be running the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and so it was a little lobby job, And so I said, where are the bad states? And they said, it's all of these. Let me outline that for you. Notice the urbanization. And Utah, which doesn't smoke, they haven't allowed a cigarette in that state. They let more wine in than they do cigarettes. And nothing. And they made the list. So I said, I don't get it. Huh? And 35 years later, NIH has some studies that prove that, in fact, it isn't an urban disease. It's a rural disease, and it's a very specific set of causes. And so I just thought, visualization is pretty useful. This is visualizing problems. Huh? Show that in a civil engineering design class, and you tune the kids right up. Show it at your firm if you built it, and it really is edifying. This one is a near miss, though. Remember that? 800,000 people walking that bridge, and it didn't fail. How close did it come? Anybody know? Huh? Yeah, so first of all, it has an 18-foot upper arc today between the pillars. Maybe not today, but most days. And this thing went concave 10 feet. And the engineers are busy calculating when will this collapse. Now, after the event's all over and the people are off, the guy running the bridge, Don somebody or another, says, the flexible structure was in no danger. The estimate was it was within 5 or 6% of collapse. Huh? Wouldn't that have been? That'd even be bigger than the people washed away in the tsunami. That'd be 800,000 people taking that suicide dive, right? Fairly interesting. I love the Building 25 emergency. I was in Building 26 at HP. We had windows looking out at Building 25. My office was right there looking, and I see a bunch of people scurrying around, and we heard this announcement, emergency's not yet over there. Huh? And there's all these tanks down there, and tanks being, oxygen tanks and, different goop of things. Out front is all the fire engines, and I went out and talked to them, and they said, well, if we go back there, these things will all be atomized, so we don't want to be there. Well, what about the people in Building 26? Oh, there's people in there? This was our gallium arsenide and gallium arsenide phosphide facility. If that had blown, and we'd put an arsenic cloud over the Silicon Valley region, it might not have been perfect. It didn't blow. I got to be on a little commission that was worried about terrorist activity on computerized grids. You've heard of these things? It's one of these meetings where, you don't learn last names, and Bill really is called George when he goes home, and, that kind of, you've probably heard of these. And I don't know why I did this, but I just went to the web and said, I wonder how many blackouts we've had that aren't terrorism sponsored. And the answer is we've gone from 8 a year to 36 a year. Now that we've got computer control. Huh? We can't even run the damn system without terrorists. They didn't like that finding, so I was dismissed from the commission. But let me show you a couple of positives, because my machine just went in the negatives, but I'm still okay? Okay. You remember this event? I was scheduled at 9 o'clock that morning on the 40th floor of that building. And the day before at 3:15, I canceled the meeting and flew back to California, which the guy I was going to meet with, because he didn't have a meeting, decided not to go in that day. Huh? And he still thanks me for that. He didn't, however, help my stock portfolio at all. But that's neither. I wound up on a commission that was sponsored by the Airline Pilots Association once this happened. Remember the shoe bomber? And what was fascinating about those shoes is they tied this guy up. This is on an American Airlines plane over the Pacific. Over the Atlantic would be a better way to tell the story because that's more accurate. They take his shoes off, and the co-pilot arrives in the cockpit and says, I've got the shoes, we're safe. And the pilot, is a little smarter, and he says, this is the worst place on the plane to have those damn things. You go back and sit in the back toilet, First day we have the commission hearings, and I'm chairman of this damn thing. We learn about laser light in the eyes of pilots from airports like Cincinnati and Las Vegas and San Diego. Okay, and the idea is you can take actually a fairly low-level laser, point it at and if the pilot stares at it, trying to figure out what it is, it momentarily blinds him. Not a good idea on approach. Huh? We'd had 4 incidents as of the day we held our first meeting, and things like that were wonderful. After this went public, which was almost 3 years later, all of a sudden we had 4,000 incidents instead of there's a copycat kind of thing here. But the point I want to make is you probably remember that. Out of this set of inquiries, we had one Delta pilot who said, I think we could fly a plane 10 miles without engines, and we can simulate that. Screwed around in the Delta simulator for over 3 weeks, crashing the plane every time, and figured it out. And Sullenberger knew that. So we can learn really hard stuff if it's simulated and modeled correctly. And that's part of here's another one. This was a modeling that NASA did for hurricanes. And the issue was they had a machine free. Intel helped build the machine over at NASA Ames. And it was to model what was happening with foam flying off the shuttle. Because that's what, led to the tiles failing and the disaster. And they found, to their astonishment, that foam hits the shuttle almost every launch. It just has a function of what size and where it hits. It isn't, and their assumption up until then had been it never hit. And they went and looked at all the spacecraft, and they had dents all over them. It was very good. And anyway, the point was, they've now modeled it. They now know the answer. They now have a machine that's not working. I mean, there's nothing else to solve. So they modeled the Western Hemisphere climate and discovered they could model hurricanes. And they modeled Katrina. Well, they modeled a bunch of stuff the year before Katrina, and the precision was like up from 85 to 95%, and the accuracy was like 4 days in advance instead of 2 days in advance, and they could pinpoint where it's coming ashore. And for Katrina, they said this is going to be a big damn deal. There you can see the little coastal outline up there. And so they have simulated something pretty neat. NOAA got sore the year before because NASA's issuing statements about weather, and they're not allowed to. Huh? So I call that a political failure. And what happened is it came ashore, and we had a bunch of other agencies involved. But the key thing is NASA knew it NASA was ready to announce 96 hours before Katrina. And NOAA forbid them to say it, and they waited a critical 36 hours. What if we'd used that time in some positive way? Not sure it would have saved the levees, but it would have saved a lot of hardship, perhaps. So the question is, how do you teach this stuff, and what do you teach? And so I want to just give you one example. Here's one school doing it, Bainbridge Graduate Institute. This is the first school we think of anywhere in the world that started teaching an MBA in sustainability. Gifford Pinchot is the grandson of the guy that founded the U.S. Forest Service, so he has chops in the field. And they do green agriculture, green business, green sustainable energy, certificates and MBAs. Fairly interesting. Jurgen, is it? Yeah, you were at the Presidio, right? Presidio now claims that they're the largest and fastest growing graduate school. To give you an idea, there are 2 total. I've just shown you both of them. And they're larger by 12 people, and they've just had all of their faculty and founders resign, and they've lost their facility. But aside from that, they're a very healthy, viable organization. But look at what they want to do. And climate change, energy security, ecosystems, they go and make the point, you can't learn these in one course. You have to learn these as a systematic, holistic kind of thing. And look at the faculty they pull together, among others. These are big names. But we don't have a coda. We don't have a prescriptive way to come at it. And so what I'm arguing you all need to concentrate on is, first of all, this data sharing and integration is really hard. And there was one phrase I just love that Ryan used. Can you trust the supplier? We run onto that all the time. Well, we've got this platform, and it might be an ocean exploration or oil exploration or, you name it. And, well, if I go on their platform, they'll make hay against me. And so we've got to kind of set that aside. And the standards is one way to do it, but collegial action on real problems is the more important thing. And I think we've heard ample evidence today these things are siloed with differing goals and all. The only way to pull that together is to actually have conversations together on how big these problems are and why we're all in this same lifeboat. And we've done a lot of study of what are the new models of leadership, and it's driven at the bottom, not at the top. So we say more than book learning education. It's really a set of these things. And again, I'm supposed to give a crass commercial plug, so come see us. We can help you do that. Give us your Horizon questions, but I'm not allowed really to do commercials. So I'll just say that's what I tried to share with you, and it's been my pleasure.